Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Straight Up Book Club. Today is really exciting because we're actually starting our second book for this season, which is A Little Life by Hanya, Yanagihara. Lots to talk about in this. This is the first episode, so the spoilers will only be for the first two parts, which we're going to be covering in this episode. We do want to do a quick trigger warning, though. We mentioned it in our last episode when we talked about the fact that we're going to be reading this one next. This book does deal with childhood abuse. It deals with suicidal ideation and also self-harm. So if those things are triggering, maybe just take 4 weeks off from the podcast and read something a little lighter. But otherwise, we're really excited to start talking about this. Before we get into it, Nat, where did you read this book? It was a lot. It's parts 1 and 2, so I feel like it was probably multiple places, but I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, it was a lot. It's like 240-ish pages. It was definitely multiple days of the week. But yeah, I mostly read it at home, to be honest. I really have not been leaving my place very often. It's been kind of shitty and gray out, so I don't really want to go anywhere.
It's been a bad start to April.
Yeah. Hopefully it starts to get better. Today's beautiful, so I'm hopeful. Where did you read it?
Where did I not read it? I don't go that many places, but because there was so much, I read it like in the morning before I started work. I read it on the subway. I read it when I came home from work. Like sometimes I had it at my desk so that if I had like a little bit of time between meetings, I'd kind of pick it up and read a few pages. I read it in bed. Yeah, and what did I drink this week? A lot of kombucha. I'm on a kombucha kick.
Ooh.
Right now. So
what's your brand? What do you?
Rise. I
Ooh.
love
that's
Rise.
good. Yeah.
You've gifted me Rise kombucha before. And
don't remember.
I remember.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I'm a big like ginger lemon fan, so I have quite a few of those, and then also the lime matcha, but nice. I'll drink any kombucha. Also, don't drink those too close to bed because you will not sleep. I think there's quite a bit of sugar and caffeine in them. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Right after dinner is better.
I was actually just listening to a podcast episode, a Bossy podcast episode. That's one of our favorite podcasts. Go check them out. And they were talking to the founders of this. I think it's called Better Booch, and it's kombucha, but they were just talking about how there's so many different ways of brewing it, kind of like how, with beer and wine, there's just like different ways of getting at the flavor profile. And so if you're into that, maybe that's a good brand to check out as well.
Yeah, I will look into that. And not to brag, but my partner also sometimes makes kombucha.
That's amazing.
He always has like a SCOBY going in our pantry. So when he's in the mood, we'll have several bottles of kombucha. And I always request ginger, but maybe I should ask him to make some other kinds.
I have to try that. You have to give me like a
next
sample.
Time he makes it, we'll have it.
Yeah.
Today, actually, we're drinking mezcalitas that Nat made for us. I've never had someone make a cocktail for me in my home. So I'm thrilled. Cheers.
Okay, I have to do that. Cheers. I have to do that more often. I'll make you more cocktails in your home.
That is really good.
It's smoky. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's good mezcal, I think. I don't know too much about mezcal, but I picked up a bottle and I like it so far.
I think it's a winner. We'll post a picture of the brand so you can look for it if you travel to Mexico anytime soon, which is where you bought it.
Duty free.
Love that. All right, shall we get into the actual book?
Let's get into it.
Okay. Nat, start us off a little bit on what has happened.
Okay, so there's a lot that's happened, so I'll try my best to remember. But overall, we're getting to know these 4 friends, their lives, their relationships, their sort of background as well, where they started out and where they are. Some of them we know more about than others. So the 4 sort of main players in this book are Willem, JB, Malcolm, and Jude, right? And then we have sort of secondary characters that are connected to them. Yes. But those are sort of who we're focused on. So they met in college, right? They met in university. They were roommates at a certain point, and then they continue on as friends after that. Um, Willem and Jude end up living together again and become really close. We'll get into it a little bit more, but they have almost sort of a like a Willem has a paternal sort of relationship with him in a way. He's always looking out, or even like
Big brother.
a big brother. Yeah, you're right. Like he's always looking out for Jude. Jude is he's had a lot of trauma in the past, and he also is has a lot of sickness as well. You know, we learn over time that you know he has trouble walking. Sometimes he has some episodes. Um, and yeah, he also has, I think, some sort of autoimmune condition that we don't know too much about, but that hinders his healing, I think.
I did not pick up on that. I assumed that the injury was so bad that he just was always going to have sort of these open wounds, but
okay.
that does make sense because I was wondering that, like, if you're in a severe car accident or injury, as they have been referring to it as, is that even a thing? So maybe there is some sort of extra layer of an autoimmune disease that
I think I'm making an assumption maybe because I feel like it's a bunch of things, and you're right. I think it might be connected to the injury, but I think he also said something about STDs later.
Yes. Yes. So that could be something that's actually like playing a role in there.
Yeah.
Okay. Not without giving anything away. Whatever. We're giving things away. That's what we're here to talk about.
So Willem's background is he's from is it Montana? Or his parents live on a ranch, right?
Yeah. I don't remember. I know Jude is from Montana.
Yes, right.
Willem, I don't remember where he's from, but his parents are originally from Stockholm.
Yeah.
That's where they've immigrated from.
Yeah. And they have a ranch, and they've had a bit of tragedy in their lives too. They had some children that died. One of them sort of later on, he had cerebral palsy, right, and sort of suffered for a few years. And Willem was there for a little bit, but not for all of it. And I think he has a little bit of guilt connected with that and a lot of resentfulness towards his parents.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the brother. Do you? I was looking for it before the recording, flipping through it, and
Is it Jeremy?
Maybe. But he I think was around for, I don't know how many years, but old enough so that Willem was in university when he was kind of going through a decline. I can't remember there was a moment that kind of started this decline in his brother. And I think he had leukemia as well. I might be making that up. But something was really like making his health decline. Also with cerebral palsy, your life expectancy is a lot shorter. And Willem kept saying, you know, should I come home? Should I come home? And his parents were adamant on him staying in school. Like they were telling him not to come home.
Yeah.
And he does come home at one point. Malcolm actually pays for his trip. He writes him a check. And he makes it home to like see him. And then Willem goes back, and not that much later, his brother passes away. His mom calls him to tell him, and it's sort of matter of fact when she tells him.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way Willem takes it, and I think they're in school at this time, right?
They are, yes.
Yeah, so I can imagine myself in that mindset of, you know, not understanding where your parents are coming from, and I think that's where Willem is as well. He's caught up in this sort of mindset of his parents could have done better, but even what you just said, right? They tell him not to come back because they know he's a kid too. They want Willem to focus on, my reading of it, I mean, is that they want him to focus on school and be present there and not, you know, be torn between his brother at home. But Willem doesn't quite get that, you know. We find out later that there's all this medical debt that they're dealing with after his brother's death too.
I think with Willem's parents, there's a lot of reading between the lines. Like, we can never fully know. And this author is so good at kind of like giving us a little bit to chew on, a little bit to kind of take away and decide for ourselves what we think there.
Yeah.
I think Willem's parents is a mix of things. I think one, there's a huge lack of communication in that family.
Oh yeah.
I think they find it really hard to like talk about their emotions. So I think one, they probably find it really hard having, you know, their son home with their other son who's dying. Like I think because what are they going to talk about? Like even when Willem's going to see his brother in the hospital, his dad's on the doorstep saying he was not going to know that you're there. He's not going to recognize you.
Yeah.
And Willem's kind of angry with him in this moment, saying something along the lines of, well, I can't remember what he says, but he's really angry with his dad for not caring enough, and that's kind of his mindset. I think, so one, I think it's lack of communication. Two, I think they show the way they care in a different way than Willem expects. I think Willem wants a little bit more emotion, a little bit more communication, and I think the parents show they care through, you know, going into insane debt in order to take care of their son.
Yeah.
I think also they've had so many children die. Willem is almost like their last hope of someone who can get out of the situation that they're in, and they don't want him to disrupt his schooling because I think they're kind of clinging to him as this like figure of success where they haven't had it.
Yeah.
And there's even a moment when there's like a quote when Willem's talking about his parents about how they would never have like shamed anyone for not being like them. They didn't even like themselves. So I think that there's a lot going on with his parents there in that regard. Also, Morty's going to come join us.
Hey, Morty.
He saw us recording and he wants to be a part. Come on.
I love that he has like a little brief moment where he's like, okay, like I'm gonna come join you just for a little bit, not the entire episode, just a brief cameo, and I love it.
It's a cameo.
Come on.
He needs a moment to jump up because, you know, he needs to give himself the mindset and the momentum to make it up onto the couch. Come on.
Yay.
Okay. So Willem, yes.
Yeah, so you had a great observation, right? Like, because of this sort of experience with his brother, he's developed this connection to Jude now. He's in this position of, you know, I want to be taking care of him in a way that he didn't really get to with his brother, perhaps. Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, that relationship is really interesting to me because I mean, I think we're finding these first two parts, and who knows where the other ones are going to take us. I like to think we're going to get to know Malcolm and JB a little bit more than we have so far.
Yeah.
But right now, we know the most about Willem and Jude, and this relationship is very interesting because Jude's whole life, he's had no one. He's had no one to take care of him, and the people who are supposed to take care of him have abused that power very literally. Like, he was subject to a lot of childhood abuse when he was living in a monastery. And Willem, on the other hand, the only person he ever took care of was his brother, and then his brother passed, and I think after that he assumed the role of big brother on Jude. And Jude isn't that unlike his brother in the sense where he can't take care of himself. It's very different though. Like with Willem's real brother, it was a medical condition where you literally could not physically take care of yourself. Jude's is more of an emotional thing. I don't know if emotional is even the right word here, but there's this block here where he can't take care of himself because he's so I think there's a lot of depression there. I think there's a lot of like mental illness there, a lot of trauma as a result of everything that he went through. And Willem has just kind of assumed this role as big brother over Jude and caretaker. And I wonder if he feels like he fails his real brother a little bit, and that's why he's so adamant on ensuring that Jude is okay.
There's also an element with Jude of, you know, feelings of inadequacy as well. We see that when he was at the monastery, he thought he'd never be adopted. Same thing later on. The counselors told him, who also abused him, told him that he was too old to be adopted and he just had to wait and write it out till he was an adult. And then he's also had moments where he thought he was almost going to be adopted, and then the family sort of backed out. So that sort of, I think, built up this feeling of inadequacy. So we find that manifested and hinted on later on as well. It's a continuing thread.
That's such an interesting moment when they when the writer goes into that part of Jude's history where he did think he was going to be adopted, and they gave him a different name. They were like, "What's your name?" And he said Jude, and they're like, "You're not really a Jude. Like, we need more of a."
Is it Cody?
It was Cody. Yeah. And he was like, "I like Cody." He very much assumes the role of whatever people want him to be. And then near the end of part 2, we see him having a dream where he's dreaming of a man in the fields, and he turns around and he can't tell from his face if it's him or not, but he's certain that it's Cody. And I think a part of him sees almost like him living a completely different life had he have been on that farm, assuming this different role.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really sad. Like, you even see it later on. You know, he has this friendship develop with one of his mentors, right, Harold, and he gets to be really close with him and his wife, and he's spending all this time at their summer house or vacation home, and bringing his friends along with him. And over time, it gets to a place where he's being invited up so often, but he doesn't understand why. He doesn't understand what it's Harold, right? It's
Harold, yeah.
Yeah, what Harold sees in him to want him up there. Yeah, and that sort of ladders into this adoption piece. Once again, Harold wants to adopt him. What did you think of that? He's an adult. They're all adults.
I liked it. I thought it was really beautiful because I don't know, there's something about adult adoption. There's a singer who did that. Is it SZA? I think so. She like adopted like an 18-year-old. Obviously 18 is a little different from 30, but and obviously it was a different form of adoption from like, you know, you're adopting someone in order to take care of them and fulfill those parental duties. But I do think that there's parental duties that exist for people who are in their 30s and 40s where it's more of like an emotional thing. It's more of a, he even literally says at one point, like, it's so that you can receive all this. Like, it had to do with the inheritance as well, because Harold and Julia, it seemed like, were pretty well to do. Perhaps from, I think they're both professors, but they were professors at like Ivy League schools, and it seemed like they might have come from some old money. And he hints at, you know, I think he just felt like his father, so like, why not make it official? I think I saw it as like quite beautiful until the moment when Jude alludes to the fact that their relationship eventually dissolves. So I feel a little bit conflicted. It's also interesting too, sorry, I feel like I'm jumping around, but this whole book goes back and forth between these 4 characters' POVs, right? But then there's one chapter where it's Harold's POV. Yeah. And it starts off him talking about, and it's very slow to get to like whose POV it is. It takes like a few pages before you get there, and then you're like, who is this person who's talking? Because he's assuming this ownership over Jude in it. And you realize that it is Harold discussing Jude and him falling in love with him. I originally took that as a little bit of like a more of a, what's the word to use, like lustful love.
Me too. Yeah.
I thought that he had those kinds of feelings
Me
for
too.
him. So I was like, oh, this is gonna be you know, a storyline. And then it's revealed that it's more of a fatherly figure, which I was like, okay, I think I prefer that, just because I'm so sad for Jude and I really want him to have some sort of parental figure.
Yeah, I think the line there was, I don't know when I thought, when I understood that you were mine or something like that. It did sound very lustful.
Yeah.
It was also, I read it as it was menacing the way that chapter started out. So I was also very relieved to see that it didn't go into the territory I was also thinking of.
Anytime there's a modicum of ownership, my mind always goes to a little bit of like,
stalkery, right?
But I guess that's my own biases, and it was really like a father-son situation. And there's a lot of sweet moments too, where there's the moment when I can't remember what happens, but Jude essentially knocks over a cup that Harold's son, we find out that Harold had a son who had passed away quite tragically when he was very young. And he breaks the cup and he's just apologizing over and over again. And Harold eventually is like, it's okay, it's okay. And Jude's like, but it meant so much to you. He's like, it did, but you mean more.
Yeah,
And
that
I
was
was
sweet.
like, oh God, get the tissues. Like
Tearjerkers, yeah.
So I think that moment kind of cemented their relationship for me. And then, you know, you get the whole ceremony of him adopting him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to go back to like that moment at the end of the chapter where it's like he alludes to the dissolution of the relationship. What did you think of the whole adoption thing? I want to know like what you thought of the adult adoption and then that end.
Yeah, so, well, I think that I was drawing sort of a similarity, I guess, with how Willem is almost not replacing his brother with his relationship with Jude, but almost sort of compensating for it. And I found that maybe this is similar. They're compensating for what they didn't have with their child with Jude.
Sorry, you did just make me remember a moment when Harold admits that him and Julia were having a fight one night about whether or not to have another child to replace.
Yeah,
their
right.
other child. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, that's a good
it's
point.
Interesting that you said that.
Yeah, yeah, I hadn't thought about that line. That's true. And I also wasn't sure if like that was a child he had with Julia or his ex-wife, and I forgot her name. Was that ever clear? Because it wasn't she pregnant?
I'm not sure. I was under the assumption it was Julia because of that fight. It felt like the kind of fight that would happen between parents who lost a child together. I could be wrong, but
yeah,
I don't know.
I'm not sure. Yeah, so there was that. I was thinking of it like that, and then also I was wondering, you know, well, there is that inheritance piece. I guess there's also like let's take care of each other in that way. And Harold and Julia are really, you know, they anticipate Jude's needs a lot. There's this moment where at their vacation home, when Jude would visit, he would have a room upstairs, but then he has sort of one of his episodes where he just can't really go up to his room, so he hides in a pantry, and the next time he visits, they've moved his room onto the main floor, so it's easier for him. So they're sort of watching and finding ways to make his experience with them a little bit easier too. So I thought there were some really sweet moments like that.
Yeah, I agree. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like, you know, the whole adult adoption thing was even less, you know, the formality and the inheritance, but like an expression of their devotion to him.
Yeah.
Similar to like a couple who has been together for, you know, decades, who it's like at the end of the day, like if you were to get divorced, you'd still have to like split everything. You're legally married or quite similar, but then, you know, you get married as an expression of your love, like stuff like that. So I feel like it's kind of, it was their way to prove to him that like we're all in. And this is how we want to prove that to you.
Isn't that so tragic? Because he isn't there. Like he can't receive that. When they make their intentions clear and they're waiting for, is it the court date or the celebration and all of that, Jude is suddenly distancing himself. He doesn't really want he doesn't want to do something wrong to make them change their minds.
I think he also feels like he's deceiving them.
Yeah, that too.
Because he hasn't told them his, you know, his background. And he knows that if he tells them now, it might make them decide not to adopt him. But if they find out later on, after he's been adopted, they'll feel like they've been deceived and they'll regret, you know, having adopted him, which is very indicative of how traumatic his upbringing was, where it was like he has not trusted anyone.
He blames himself.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone he's ever supposed to have as a figure of trust has betrayed him. So I think he's having these anxieties of the same thing happening with Harold and Julia. I think that's also why, sorry, and I'm totally going on a little bit of a tangent. I'll be quick, but he's obsessed with trying to remember at what point his life changed.
Yes, yeah.
And he had been experiencing abuse from the priest and the brothers at the monastery for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And he pinpoints the moment where he kind of changes is when Brother Luke leads him into a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's after Brother Luke has just done a kind gesture for him.
Mm-hmm.
Jude in one of what he calls tantrums. They're definitely like emotional outbursts from a child who's being traumatized, but he's calling them tantrums. And he says he goes to Brother Luke's garden and he takes off all the daffodil heads as a point of like revenge on the monastery or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a really hard day, he goes back to his room, and in his room, Brother Luke has given him all of his books back that had been confiscated a long time ago, and in a little vase are these daffodil heads.
Yeah.
And I think that's a moment when he sees Brother Luke in a good light.
Yeah.
And almost immediately after, when he goes to see him, he's brought into the greenhouse. It's very vague, but I think it's pretty clear that he was also abused by him.
Yeah.
And I think that was his moment where he had finally found someone that he trusted or someone that he felt akin to, and then that person then betrayed him. So I feel like he's having these moments of like, I feel too close and attached to you. I know that you're going to do something to betray me. And I think that's his what would you say, his like barrier or block with Harold and Julia. That's my assumption anyways.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's he can't trust anyone that he's getting close to. It's interesting that he never feels like that with Willem though, right? Because they are very close, and Willem is probably the only person. Well, we haven't really gone into this, but Jude doesn't really talk about his past very openly. He tries to skirt around it as much as possible, answer it with like half answer sort of thing. But Willem knows quite a bit. I mean, he knows a bit about his past, and Harold over time gets to know a bit as well. But yeah, I don't quite understand why Willem is a safer figure for him than Harold. Maybe it has something to do with Willem being closer in age, because everyone that's harmed him has been older. That might be one element.
I think that's probably part of it.
Hmm.
I wonder if it's also... Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably a big part of it. I think also Willem doesn't know everything about him, so I don't know if he has fully trusted Willem. I think he's someone that he does feel close to and someone who he does really love, but he hasn't fully trusted him.
You think?
He hasn't opened up about his childhood. Willem's kind of come to conclude it. He also hasn't opened up about his self-harm. It's only clear on the night when he, he cuts himself to the point where he is bleeding out and he has to go get Willem and take him to the emergency room. And that's kind of the first night that there's this clear moment between them. Before that, Willem was just kind of guessing because of like the long shirts he was wearing at the beach and the fact that he would never expose his arms, and he would kind of make little hints to him like, do you want to borrow my t-shirt, like it's really hot. Like they would never really open up. So I think that's probably part of it. I think the amount of trust that he does give him a lot has to do with their similarity in ages. He's not a figure of power in his life. He's more of a peer. Whereas everyone else is powerful, I guess.
Yeah, it's the power that is really that's probably closely tied. And so you're right. Like being in that space, it can almost be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, where it's like I'm expecting these things to happen, so I'm going to test the boundaries of this relationship. And I think that's what happened with Harold. I don't think that Harold turned or Julia turned. I think it was more just I think Jude just trying to see, like, are you just like testing them continually, maybe?
I have a feeling and obviously we'll find out when we get to it, but I have a feeling that this dissolving of the relationship is entirely on Jude's part. I don't know. We'll find out, but I feel like it's a little bit of a self-sabotaging situation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about JB and Malcolm a little bit, because they're not as addressed in the book as Willem and Jude, but I do think they're really important to talk about because they're obviously pivotal characters in this. I think we're probably going to get to know them a little bit more as we go through, but we do have little kind of what would you call, like, there are moments when we get their points of view and how their minds work, and we also get how they work based on Jude's interpretations and Willem's interpretations. So what do you gather from them, and like what do you kind of think of them in their roles?
Yeah, I do think we're going to go into that more because Act 2 was really, it was called The Postman, right? And it was meant to be about Jude, like Jude is the postman. Well, what we know about JB is that he has these ideas of himself as an artist. We do know later on he is really successful. He has paintings that people want. They're going to be at the Museum of Modern Art. But we also know that he is using his friends as muses, right? He is sort of, he has this moment that's almost like a breakthrough in his part that he doesn't love the, well, he thinks of himself as an artist in a medium that's quote unquote boring. It's not any kind of innovative sort of media. So what he's doing is he's trying to find another way at it, I think. And so what he finds is that he starts to take photos of his friends, just like really candid photos, and then he starts to paint them. And he finds that that's his sweet spot. But then he does ask them about it. He does sort of get permission. Jude is kind of hesitant, but in the end, he's like, all right, fine. As long as you ask me for permission, that's okay. But he starts to take these like clandestine photos of Jude, and Jude has some, really bad moments that end up being photographed. And that is the painting that he wants to be at the moment.
Yeah, I really want to know what your personal thoughts are on that because for me, JB, and I think we're getting a lot of the point of view from like Jude and Willem, where I think they look down on JB a little bit. Him seeing his friends as his muse to me was very beautiful. But I don't know, like we can talk about it. I do think there are some moral issues that come up with Jude, but he, I think he sees his friends as people that are worth photographing and worth painting, and I kind of liked that about him. But then he crosses a line with Jude. He does take that picture of him when he's in a moment of like pain, and in one of his episodes, as he calls them, and that's, like you said, that's the painting that goes that Moma wants. And what do you think? Like, do you think that JB is in the wrong here? I like the part where he doesn't where he crosses a line that's probably a little bit more black and white, but him painting his friends in the first place, what do you think of that?
It's a hard one. I mean, it's like, what's street photography, right?
Yeah.
We just take photos of people. Not we, but people do. And there's just some sort of implicit understanding that that's okay, because but there's moments when there's not. I think it's such a gray area. You have to, in moments like that, not everyone knows that they're muses, is my point. So is that not okay? I don't know. Personally, if I was to find myself being photographed in that way, I'd probably be okay with it. But I say that now, if intimate moments were being captured, I probably wouldn't feel like that. Or if moments that I felt really bad about were being captured, I wouldn't feel like that. So I think it's really dependent on the context. I don't know if there's like a blanket statement that we can.
No, you're right. And Jude's also like, he carries a lot of shame, and I think he carries a lot of shame in general, but especially in these moments when he's having these episodes, because they are in relation to the car injury, which I think we've all gathered at this point is self-inflicted.
Yeah.
And I think that's heavy for him. So I think these moments when people see him when he's having the episodes,
Yeah.
he probably feels quite shameful in them. So I understand that. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There is a moment when he's having an argument with JB about like it's at the gallery. Jude doesn't find out that JB took these photos and painted them until he's literally at his opening and he sees them there. That's not cool. But they have a fight afterwards where Jude's like, you said that you'd get my permission. And JB's like, that was just a courtesy. Like, I actually don't need to ask for your permission. I can paint whatever I want. That was definitely a moment in their relationship that felt very tense. And I think we also realized then that there's a clear divide in the four characters. Like, Malcolm and JB are close, and Willem and Jude are close. And because Willem takes Jude's side, Malcolm takes JB's side, and the four of them kind of don't talk for quite some time.
And that's so interesting too, that they're drawn to each other in that sort of way, because I think JB and Malcolm both see themselves as creators in a way. JB's got that artistic, or he sees himself as an artist. Malcolm is an architect, and he has sort of a similar mindset as JB. He works at, so Malcolm works at this architect's firm, and they describe it as every night when the partners go home, they sort of transform the space and start working on their own buildings, what they really want to be creating. And a lot of that is really innovative, but Malcolm is stuck in this space, similarly to JB. He feels like his work isn't innovative, he's just copying other people. So I found that similar too. He's using other people's work, other people as muses.
That's so astute. You're right.
So maybe that's their connection point. But Willem doesn't really see himself as an artist. He's just like, he fell into this role of actor.
It's really interesting too that JB and Malcolm both a little bit more in the like copying side of the arts, and then I do think that Willem and Jude are probably a little bit more what's the word I'm looking for? What's the opposite of copying? Like
creating?
A little bit more creative, I guess, or a little bit more the word will come to me later. But Willem and Jude are struggling the most. Malcolm and JB are both in, JB becomes a prolific artist. I forgot his name. Malcolm, I mean, like, it sounds like he's in a good job, whether or not he's this amazing architect.
Yeah.
They also both, there's a huge, like, socioeconomic divide between these four as well. Malcolm's the clear richest. Like, he comes from big money, old money. JB, I don't think that he, it seems like he was more middle class, but he actually confesses to experiencing a little bit of like revisionist history, where he tried to paint himself as poorer than he was, and he was embarrassed when people came over and saw that he actually like had more of a middle class upbringing. And he was brought up, it seems like, in a matriarchy where it was like a lot of his aunts and his mother. And then there's a huge divide between them. And then like Willem, who grew up with ranchers who were in tons of debt, and then Jude, who had nothing.
Yeah.
And do you find that that's interesting, that this divide between the four of them is almost like socioeconomic?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But then also in the way that they express their forms of art. Like, the two that are a little bit more affluent are the ones that are copying, and then the two that are not as well off are the ones that are more original. That was the word I was looking for earlier, original.
There's also an element of race. Like,
yes,
JB is always sort of challenging Malcolm, right? In like his quote unquote blackness.
Yes, I got the picture that JB's black and Malcolm is mixed race, because I think Malcolm's dad is black, but his mom is white.
Yeah. I think they mentioned that. And his mom's an author, right? And he sort of makes this comment about how he has had to think less about his race because of his mom's socioeconomic status. And that's one of the points that JB challenges him on. And that actually ties into the postman label that they give Jude later. So there's all these like connection points. And the way that comes up is it JB who, no, it's Malcolm who talks about himself as being post-black.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I took that as, when you're in university and you're learning about all these sort of ways of thinking, all these like ideologies, and you're trying stuff on. yeah, so there's that element of it. But JB challenges that, being like, well, that's not a thing. If anyone is post anything, it's Jude, because we can't tell anything about his present or past, which is a really hurtful thing to say.
They really use Jude as their sorry, I feel like I'm blanking on words today. Like they use him as their fuel for jokes, it seems. Like he's the one who has the nickname. He's the one. They chide him a lot. You're right. They do call him the postman. I can't remember what words they use. They're like, he's post this, he's post that. He is the postman.
Post ethnicity, post sexuality, I think, something like that.
The
Yeah,
most
we don't
ambiguous.
know, who he's been with or anything.
Yeah, they're quite cruel to him, actually. Although I'm getting the sense that JB that's kind of his character. He's a little bit like, I think that's how he shows love.
Right? That's such a great point, because isn't it the ultimate sort of way of like showing love to, and I know this is such a like murky area, but like to make your friends the centerpiece of your life's work, right? Isn't that kind of beautiful?
That's how I took it. I think JB's a little misunderstood. I'm kind of hoping that we get to know that a little bit more as we, continue reading. But I definitely think that he's misunderstood by Willem and Jude for sure. And I wonder if Malcolm maybe sees a little bit more of that side of him. But yeah, I think he really loves his friends. Like you spend a lot of time painting people. Like that takes a lot of time. And the amount of time he's like, there's a moment when Jude's remarking on the painting of the expression on his face and how, I can't remember how he articulated it, but you could see the pain there. You could see the way that his hand is clenched. Like there's no way JB wasn't feeling that when he was painting it. Like you can't capture pain without kind of funneling that in there. I don't know how else to articulate it, but I don't know. I just feel like he loves his friends more than he lets on, but I don't know if he knows how to show it in the way that they want to receive it.
As you were saying that, I just made the connection. Do you think that's the painting, that's the picture on the book cover? Because the way you were describing it, it's like clenched hand and this expression of pain, and like that might be it.
Let's leave you all with a quote. I want to read a quote because it's really sweet. Okay, it's about friendship, so it's very nice. The only trick of friendship is to find people who are better than you. Not smarter, not cooler, not kinder. Sorry, not smarter, not cooler, but kinder and more generous and more forgiving. And then to appreciate them for what they can teach you, and to try to listen to them when they tell you something about yourself, no matter how bad or good it might be, and to trust them, which is the hardest thing of all, but the best as well.
I love that so much. Tears.
Yeah, it's very, very sweet, but true, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a great quote. So, yeah, thanks for joining us for book club today.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. So get caught up on Acts 3 and 4.
Yes.
That's what we'll read next time. It's probably about the same amount, like 200 or so pages. So we'll see you next Thursday.
See you at book club.
Bye.
Bye.